what I thought we would do is kind of work our way through some portions of kind of the business entity and where we're dealing with security and different technologies to try to secure all of our data. And so what I thought we'd start with would be the inside the office. So, most people are focused on the outside the office, the firewall, how do people get into your business, when the reality is about 65 to as high as 90% of most breaches occur from the back door or the inside the office, from users or from emails and so forth. So I thought we would start there and see, what are we seeing, start with the panel, and again, y'all jump in with questions, but what are y'all seeing as the biggest vulnerabilities in and around the office?
So I think, we got to take a look at a few things. One is we want to make sure that, as the first presenter talked about, we want to make sure that the passwords and everything are not easy to break, right? And then at the same time, we want to make sure that from a perimeter perspective, you have a next generation firewall and a next generation email security solution. So by that, what I mean is, think about how security is laid out, right? The traditional security was think that you're living in a house that's in a gated community, right? That's your entry and exit point, right? Now, that's your first layer of defense. You have to make sure that, let's assume the fact that you have to make sure that you're living in a gated community. The second thing is going to be, okay, you have to have a house with doors, locks. That's your second layer of defense. Then your third layer of defense will be a dog. We are here in Louisiana. Fourth layer of defense is going to be a gun. And at the end of the day, you are trying to keep your locker secure. That's where your money is. That's where your credit card is. That's where all of your information is. So that's the device, right? So we have to make sure that you guys have a solution that has a layered security approach, right? So taking that into IT world, right? You have to make sure that you have a solution that can do content filtering. You have to have a solution that can do anti-spyware. You have to have a solution that can do application control and visibility. For example, you might have a marketing guy that needs access to LinkedIn, right? You might have somebody else that needs access to some Facebook, but you might not need a sales guy to have access to Salesforce or, sorry, you need the sales guy to have access to Salesforce, right? But not LinkedIn or some of the other applications. So application control becomes important, visibility becomes important, content filtering becomes important, and in the first slide, first presenter also talked about being hacked by the Chinese or not being hacked by the Chinese. So you have to make sure that you have geo-filter, right? And botnet filter to help secure your network perimeter, at the same time have an email security strategy, because those are your two exit points out of your network, right? So we have to make sure that you have a good layered defense to help protect your end device, right? And on top of it, also have a solution that can, it's easy to manage, gives you the visibility, and gives you the security that you need. I must have talked a little bit more.
I can't speak to the physical. For cloud services, though, you got to think about inside. It's the user, weak passwords, Wi-Fi spots. Are you logging on at Starbucks? Are you getting on VPN when you do that? That really becomes the entry point nowadays for a lot of ways that people get access to your data. It's not because they penetrated a firewall. It's not because they were able to get in through some back door or SQL injection. You see less and less of that. Now it's more social campaigns, phishing, email attacks. Those are the ways that people get in. I mean, I've had clients just in the past couple months, my own clients that I represent and that I manage, that were attacked and had phishing attacks and had some sort of malware penetrate their enterprise. And we're talking large enterprises that have a lot of security built into it. So at the end of the day, when when I'm always talking about security, it's always really the attack vector. The number one nowadays is the individual user. And the more that you can educate your end users on how they need to be conscious of what they're doing wherever they are now, because now it's just not inside the walls of your business. It's, you know, we're mobile, we're cloud, we're all this, so it's not just confined to your walls, your data center. You need to be cognizant of that, and end users need to start adapting to that as well.
So yeah, phishing attacks I think are also getting, it's very, very important to educate them on how to identify phishing attacks, because they are getting more sophisticated and much more difficult to detect. I remember years ago it was easy. It's usually coming from some other country, so spelling is completely off. It's really easy to detect them. Now, nowadays you get one from, let's say, for example, Apple wants your username and password, and then all of a sudden it brings them to a website where they want your credit card information. So, and it looks very legitimate, and so that's something that we definitely need to look out for. I'm more on the hardware side, so I'd say making sure your devices are locked down physically as well. Make sure that they're actually, if they're in the office, they need to be locked down. Also, hardware encryption is also very important. If they do get the device, we want to make sure that they can't use any of the data. So that's also really important.
And building on what has been said here, security is a journey. It's not a destination. And so you can train your employees once, but things change and evolve. And if you don't keep refreshing that training with them, they're going to fall back into old habits. On the hardware side, patches and updates need to be applied continually. Many of the hacks that take place, if you go out and dig into the details, you find out that it's because a system was not updated or patched with something that was already out there to fix the vulnerability. But because it hadn't been applied, that company or entity was vulnerable and they were hacked.
Equifax.
So it's very important to recognize that you don't just have a one-time fix here. Rather, as a company, you have to adopt a mentality of security, which means that you do ongoing training and refresher training with your employees, which is the number one vector now in this day and age. You also have to keep updating your security profiles, updating your hardware, your security, the patches that need to be in place. Again, you're on a journey of security, not a destination.
I know when I was researching some of the things we were going to cover, in 2017, the Fortune put out the top hacked passwords, and the number one password was 123456. So obviously, what we've been talking about with our clients is changing the thought of a password to a passphrase, so make them much more complicated. That's the very easy thing you can do within any organization. There are a number of other things that we can talk about, which we will be talking about, like dual factor authentication and encryption, which I think are all really important.
Right, and to add to that, not using the same password for every single account is very important, and I think that is overlooked all the time. So,
yeah, so our InfraGuard guys were here, and they with the FBI, and they talked about a program, and I'm going to ask them later about it, where it would help you make these complicated passphrases, but make them for different accounts with kind of a methodology that you know about that makes it easier for you to remember them. So, I'm sorry, we had a question?
Yeah, a question. Well, a comment too, I guess. I work at Loyola, and we're getting ready to introduce a video from a company that talks about individual cyber security around campus. And one of the issues we're having, though, is getting the faculty, especially the faculty, I guess, to buy in. We can kind of make the staff do things, but the faculty, we have a little trouble getting them to buy into all that stuff. So I had a question about that. How is that accomplished, especially at a university or even at a company? And then the second point would be, that's all I got for right now. That's enough.
Getting buy-in is hard, and not to, you don't want to shame someone too badly, but if you were to have a phishing experiment with your faculty, and just run an experiment, hire a company to come in and phish against your people, and then in a friendly but candid way, identify those who were vulnerable. and sort of let people know that they are at risk. Nothing like seeing your colleagues or find yourself having done something stupid to suddenly raise the awareness and make it so that you're very much more committed. We recently did this in our own company just a few months ago, ran that through, and it's amazing how the vulnerabilities just dropped because people were aware and they didn't want to be the next ones that were used as the example of a failure.
I did remember the other question. One of the faculty members I had a meeting with, she was complaining about the price of laptops, and she said, she made a statement, she said, I said, well, we encrypt, we make sure all the laptops are encrypted, and there's a little cost involved in that. And she said, well, I can just get around that with a USB stick. So, and I said, well, yeah, but what if your laptop's stolen? So it's just the mentality sometimes of people out there, they figure they can get around it, you know, whatever you do.
It's an inconvenience, and so they just try and get around it any way possible. So the education is really important for that. So.
And I'll find that typically the users will spend more time trying to figure out a way that's easier to a solution than just taking the 10 minutes to do the security refresh or whatever it may be. So figuring out a way to make it easy, which is not in and of itself is not an easy thing to do, but putting yourself in the mentality of that end user of, you know, how is this in their day-to-day operations? Is this inconveniencing them, or what is the benefit to them? And trying to put it in that perspective does usually resonate with them.
All right, we had another question.
So the user security, like I said, the highest, I guess, you know, the 60 to 90%. Is there anything like programs or recommendations you would give on what to enroll our users in to get this annual training or monthly training to have a, because that's our biggest scenario or biggest problem is trying to get over that hurdle on how to give the users training, what material to give them training, to whereas if there's a program or something we can enroll them in that would allow us to give them better training, is there something that y'all would suggest or available to do that?
You know, it's really application specific or company specific. You have to look to the needs you're trying to accomplish. And it is a carrot and stick approach. If you want to reward good behavior, but also sometimes you have to sort of raise the awareness by tripping up some people in a good way, showing them that they are vulnerable, making them aware that it is a reality for them. We all feel like we're invulnerable. You know, I'm never going to be the one who leaves my USB stick lying around, or I'm not going to lose my laptop or that. Different applications also have different solutions. Hardware encryption is important, but hardware encryption is only as safe as the people who have access to those passwords. Your administrators who can get into that hardware, they're a risk, they're a vulnerability. Right now, global banks are saying that hardware encryption is not enough, that encryption has to be done by the application that's providing your security and your management, because that is independent of your network administrators and the people that run that. So again, you have to look at the different things. There are many different companies out there that provide different levels of training in that. It's a matter of finding what works best within your budget, what your needs are, and how frequently you think you need to accomplish that. Other stat?
And it'll be a little self-serving, but based on what David said earlier about some phishing tests, we have done those, and we can do them for companies where it actually will tell you kind of what your vulnerabilities have been, and it actually provides training while it's doing the testing. And
Email, like I said, the phishing, we've done that too, but the more we're looking into is like the other aspect, like I said, that you know in the USB, you know, them doing the workarounds, explaining to them why you shouldn't do the workarounds, that way they understand what the vulnerabilities are, they're doing the workaround, you know, other stuff that to give them knowledge of why our security is in place and why you should be trying to find a workaround for it.
And that's really true. If you have buy-in from your employees, help them understand why they have to do these annoying security practices. And the reality is it is annoying. It impacts their workflow. But if the whole company understands the role of security and also understands that they're at risk, so you run the tests occasionally, do the phishing tests, and a couple of people trip up, and you can use them as friendly examples. But help your employees understand why they're doing the encryption or why they're doing the different security protocols. Then they become a part of the team, part of the solution. And they may come back with some solutions and recommendations for you that will help in the implementation in your company.
good. Any more questions on that area?
I have a question about passwords. Two questions, but first is, a few years ago I read the best thing to do is to have a complex password that had, you know, an exclamation point or a capital. But recently I've been reading that the thought about passwords incorporates the human factors. If you make me change my password every 3 months, I will write it down somewhere. So what is the current thought about that? And the second question is, what are your thoughts about biometric, like fingerprints or retinal passwords?
As far as the password changing, I can go both ways on it. I can see where it is because it every 90 days, 180 days, whatever, and sometimes it's actually required by a rule or regulation, by HIPAA, by FERPA, by CJIS, IRS, name one of those. Typically, there is something in there that talks about password changing. So sometimes you just can't get around it. So again, it comes back to the employee education, making them aware of why they have to do it and what they need to do to be sure that they're keeping themselves safe. As far as the complexity, to me, it's really not about the complexity, it's about the length. The longer you can make a password, you gotta think, you got 26 characters, you got 10 digits, you got so many special characters. Multiply that, compound it by the number of characters or number of actual characters you have in your password. That just makes it the combinations exponentially more for someone to try and crack if they're actually going to use that user to be a victim and get into their data and get into your organization. So to me, it's not necessarily the complexity. Well, it is good to have a complex, to have alphanumeric and special characters, but it's length. Just choosing a sentence sometimes is a big thing that you know, right? So just think about it from that standpoint.
Right, if you write it down, though, it doesn't matter, right?
Right,
and
that's
I
training
completely
right
agree
there.
with that. And then, again, it's coming back to changing human behavior, which is by far the hardest thing that you have to do when it comes to securing your network or securing your business. It's the human factor. I mean, it come back to, presented earlier, you had a doctor had a laptop stolen and, Mississippi Medical or University of Mississippi Medical Center was fined, what was it, 2.5 million? 2.7. So, I mean, that's from one individual and his behavior and what he did. I mean, take it for your example. You talk about, education. What happens if that user takes that laptop out and they're not secure with it, and all of a sudden they've got student data? What's the FERPA fine? I mean, it's putting it in terms of that, of how they understand it, and making them understand what they're really responsible for to help change that behavior.
I have a quick follow-up question. How do you guys feel about tools like 1Password or LastPass, where it's, do you think it's safe to use them, where it's storing all your passwords encrypted, so you can have different passwords for every site? I don't know if you guys use any of those sort of tools.
Just make the password to that really, really long.
Make sure, on that, there's usually a master password that you have to set, and make sure that that one is extremely complex and that cannot be hacked. I mean, I don't know, the LastPass, 1Password, they're all supposed to be very encrypted and safe, but I don't have as much experience with that, so.
We're doing a lot of work with third-party SSO or single sign-on providers. You guys have probably all heard of companies like Okta that are using API-based key encryption passes so that the passwords are stored in a central store, and then most of those are using two-factor, and then sometimes three-factor with certificates installed on the machines as well. So you've got the two human factors plus kind of, not necessarily biometrics, but almost, kind of the digital signature that I trust this device, and then I'm going to trust the person to enter this password, and then we're going to grab an outside device to do that. So there's a lot of work being done in that particular market, especially around SSO type services using SAML and a few of the other APIs that are out there today.
Well, as we move to, I wanted to move a little bit to the network and firewalls, things that are kind of behind the scenes that users don't always have control over. But thing that bridges that gap is two-factor authentication. And so I was wondering what your guys' thoughts would be on, the role that can play in ramping up security in the environment.
Yeah, so from the inside of the network, right? So if you're on the inside of the network, trying to, when you come onto your device, your desktop, laptop, having a two-factor authentication password plus a token would be helpful. Then the posture of your machine, so you can have a NAC solution saying that, hey, since you're coming from the inside, right? We talked about inside earlier as well. I'm going to check the posture of your machine to make sure that you have the latest antivirus, you have so-and-so that is up to par with your company policy before I let you onto the network, right? So you entered your password, you entered your token, it's checking the state of your machine now, right? To make sure that you have right antivirus, right everything, registry is your own, and then I'll let you onto the network, right? So that can be your layered security approach before you even get onto the network. You have these 3-4 things before you can get onto the network, right?
So that talking about that from internal systems, I'll talk about it from a cloud standpoint, and then I'll be a little self-serving here. So built into some of our tools that we have, it's looking at things like, because how many people here work strictly from their office, don't do any work at home, no work while they're traveling, nothing of that sort? All right, okay, that's what I thought. We're all on the move, we're all mobile. So how do you secure that when you're outside, when you're at the coffee shop, when you're at the airport, wherever you may be? And that comes into, when you look at cloud applications, cloud app security. Can you do geofencing, the multi-factor authentication, tying that back to an on-prem solution or a cloud solution? For us, when I'm traveling, if I'm not on my VPN, if I just happen to log on and I'm on a Wi-Fi, I'm challenged twice for multi-factor authentication, and I have to use biometric on my phone. So it's looking at it from the standpoint of, sometimes your users are not going after or not connecting to applications that are necessary to reside within your network. It's how are you safeguarding their access to those applications of data that are outside of your network that you use for your business.
Can you all address encryption? So that was talked about earlier in a lot of the legal aspects, that you're somewhat protected, at least when it comes to the release of data, if you can show that the data has been encrypted. What are recommendations, particularly from the hardware vendors and so forth? What are you recommending with data encryption?
Well, there's many different levels of data encryption. If you don't have data encryption on your servers, that would be terrible. I think that you need at least 256-bit encryption. We've got different, speaking with for HPE, we do our encryption on the hardware level on the controller. So all the data is encrypted, even while it's in transit between the controller and actual storage. And then we have different levels, like the FIPS 140, so we meet the different levels of encryption, and that's very important, and also the NSA suite, we meet that as well. But encryption is invaluable, as you just need to make sure your key is safe off the server, completely away from it. That way, if any data is stolen, it's inaccessible. So, go ahead.
So that can be a real challenge if you're a smaller entity and you're looking at how do I handle not only applying security and encryption, but how do I keep it current? How do I provide the protections and the backups? That's where the other option is to use a trusted vendor. And I'm self-serving here. We're a cloud provider and providing data, encrypted protection of data over the cloud. Whether whatever vendor you choose to go with, they can help mitigate some of that risk by providing for you those services that you either do not want to invest in or don't have the resources to invest in or to manage at a level that would be appropriate for the security you want to maintain. And so by partnering with the appropriate vendors, you can then get the security that you need for your data and still have access in the services that you need. Again, you have to look at your use case for your company or your organization. What makes the most sense? Hosting it internally and providing all of that security and infrastructure and managing it? Or do you work with some sort of partner or group of partners who are going to take some of that work away from you but provide you that same level of security and protection? And those are a case-by-case solution that you have to decide for what makes sense for your organization.
So I'm going to add one more thing, right? So if you take a look at, and Google changed the game here, right? So if you take a look at, you're inside the office and you're trying to browse, right? By default, if you open up Google, you start searching for something, you will see HTTPS, right? Back in the day, YouTube was HTTP, now everything is HTTPS. That traffic is encrypted, right? So 60+% of the traffic is encrypted, right? And your firewalls today, most of them are not doing anything to look at encrypted traffic. Fair enough? So if I'm a hacker, I'm going to spin up a website, encrypted website, put something on that, because I know that that's the way of getting into your network, right? So you have to have a solution that can open up the encrypted traffic, scan it, is it good, is it blessed, and then re-encrypt it and send to the internet. So just want to make sure that you understand that 60%, your current firewall solution is only 40% effective, give or take, and it's going to change day by day, right? It's going to move more towards 70%, 75%, and that's the reality. And Google changed the game, I guess a year ago, where if you're searching for example, if you're searching for an IT service provider company, if your website itself is not encrypted, Google would rank you lower. So people went towards encrypting their website. So it's a cat and mouse game, right? So you just want to make sure that you have a solution that can look at encrypted traffic as well.
Well, back to a little bit on the employee education side and what you might want to have on your network. So earlier, Tushar was showing me an example. He just pulled up 2 news websites, top, typical news media. And then the tracking showed that it actually referred to over 70 different other websites when those 2 main pages were pulled up. No other browsing was done. And so that gets into where you're getting a lot of advertising and other things that come to your web page. And today they will call it malvertising when you get malware via some of this, via the advertising. So on the back end, what about the DNS filtering and things that people should be doing today to help protect them from, because that's really where a lot of the ransomware can come from.
So for you guys, if you guys have Firefox, I'm sure there's a plugin for Chrome as well. But if you guys have Firefox, download a plugin called Lightbeam. Okay, Lightbeam. It's a firewall plugin. Firefox plugin, and the whole idea that I was trying to show Darryl is, you open up a couple of websites. I opened up Fox News, MSNBC, to be politically correct, and 2 websites that open up. I had 100+ third-party websites that it opened up. That's the reason. If you guys are looking for sunglasses on Google, suddenly you start seeing your advertisements, the same advertisements on Facebook, Amazon, you name it, right? So it's how all these systems talk to each other on the back end, right? So like I was talking about layered security approach, your content filtering can be one layered security approach, and there's other stuff like geofilter, botnet filter. There's a whole layered security approach that you need to have. You might be protecting at one layer, but what if it comes through, right? What is my second layer of defense? Then what is my third layer of defense, right? And that's the reason I was giving that example of, at the end of the day, I'm trying to protect my locker, right? I'm trying to protect my device. So just check it out. You'll be able to see interesting data there. Just opening up a few websites.
It was Lightbeam.
Lightbeam. L-I-G-H-T.
Lightbeam, B-E-A-M.
B-E-A-M. And it's for Firefox.
I guess that gets back to what Ray was talking about earlier. Where's the forget me button or something like that you were talking about? I'm not sure if that's even possible. So let's move on because we're going to run out of time, but to the cloud. So how many people here have some or most or a good part of their data in the cloud? Anybody not have any data in the cloud at all? One person. So a lot of people are doing it, some are not, some are afraid of the cloud. So I guess my question to the panel would be is, first of all, should people be afraid of the cloud? Dave, you talked earlier that if you're a smaller company, a larger company might be able to implement security practices that you couldn't do on your own. So certainly there's a benefit. So should they be afraid or maybe more diligent, and what should they be looking for in a good cloud provider?
I'll
Because
take the
there's
first.
hundreds. I mean, anybody that can
Yeah.
put a rack in a data center and put a server in there can call themselves a cloud provider. And so you got to separate the wheat from the chaff in this.
Well, and that's the beginning of the answer. Like any other answer, it's not yes or no. There are bad cloud providers, there are excellent cloud providers, and everything in between. And so you have to recognize, with that understanding, the cloud has become a way for all organizations to either shift some responsibility or to gain expertise and skills that they don't have or they don't have the resources to invest in and to gain that. And so you have to do your due diligence. You can't just go out and pick the first cloud provider you see. You have to find the right cloud providers, the ones that provide verified services that meet your needs. They're going to be an asset and a partner to you in meeting your needs there. And they are out there. The cloud now, we have seen a seismic shift from 3-5 years ago when the cloud was a dirty word. And if you were out on a cloud, you were in the Wild West, to now the largest global entities around the world are leveraging the cloud because they recognize that the cloud, individuals like NetDocuments, we specialize in cloud security. That if you worked with NetDocuments, we can focus on that so you can focus on what you do best. And we become a partnership in providing that security. And these different companies here, that's what we do. We leverage each other and help each other to accomplish what you need to do. So is the cloud a safe place to be? Yes, if you do your due diligence. How do you know if you're with a good cloud provider? You have to evaluate that cloud provider, and we'll talk more as we go along about that, but I'm sure these gentlemen have other things to add there.
Yeah, for me personally, it was, moving to seeing the way that everything has shifted from an on-site, being in the communications industry. Everybody wanted the PBX on the wall and want the phones that are connected on an isolated network, to looking at UCAS, Unified Communications as a Service, or CCAS, Contact Center as a Service. Now all of a sudden you're putting all of that data in the cloud. How do you trust that it's secure? 8x8 was one of the first companies to develop a security office and implemented a security officer that oversaw that. And as such, we carry the certifications from a lot of the acronyms that you've heard thrown out on the table today. Everything from FISMA to, we'll do HIPAA business associate agreements where we'll work together to ensure that you have the paperwork that you need to comply with your department. So our security office works in compliance as well as security. It's twofold, right? It's keeping your data secure so that we don't need the services of some of the panelists that you've heard earlier, but then again, making sure that you have access to all of the data that you need. So I think one of the most important things to look at is not necessarily that monthly recurring price that people are evaluating. Everybody, you get a proposal, if you're completely honest with yourself, what's the first thing you turn to when you start to look at and evaluating something is that cost. One of the first things you should look at is, what does that cost include? Because the lowest price doesn't always win. To Darryl's point, I can go on 5 appointments in a week and I'll hear 3 people as a competitor that I've never heard of before when I do research. They're simply reselling somebody else's communication service. They either renting a rack or they're actually renting that service and doing what's called white label. So what is the level of security that sits behind that, and how can you ensure that those agreements are passed on to you instead of just, hey, it's $2.99 a month versus $4.99 a month, or whatever the cost difference might be. So evaluate, to Mike's point, evaluate the service provider, make sure that they have the certifications, ask for copies of them. Don't just believe it on a website. How many people believe everything they see on the web? I think Abraham Lincoln said it best, right? Don't believe everything you see on the web. At the end of the day, just because I put a label on my website, there's ethics things that fall into place there. But do they have copies of those certifications with FISMA? Can they actually back that up? Do they continue to do pinhole testing? Is that pinhole testing, is it something that you have access to? How often are they doing the updates?
So the reasons that you go to cloud may be different for every single organization in this room. I mean, most, if not all, I think are Gulf Coast businesses, right? How many are worried that a hurricane's going to come through, it's going to ruin your data center, you're going to have no access to data and all that, right? So I actually had a client in Houston that the first floor of their building, which luckily wasn't their servers, but it was all their comms, was completely flooded from Harvey. They didn't right-size their backup data center, so all of a sudden they're coming to us and say, we need to move stuff to the cloud as quickly as possible so we can get back up and running. everyone's story is different, but you have to look at it from the standpoint of when I select a cloud provider, whatever it is, what am I going to be responsible for to maintain security within whatever I put up there? Whether it's IaaS, I'm putting VMs, or I'm actually spinning up storage device, virtual storage devices, virtual networks, whether it's some sort of PaaS environment, or whether it's a SQL that I can just build on, I don't have to do the underlying maintenance of the patches that are associated with that in the OS, or it's a SaaS service. It's I'll say, an Office 365, it's a Google, G Suite, whatever it may be. I always say, find out what you're responsible for. Because as a cloud provider, and I'll use us as an example, yeah, we have responsibilities and we have all the labels up there. And by the way, we do have the documents if you're actually going out to look for them. I had to pull our FedRAMP one yesterday. So, but there's certain things that we are not owners of your data. We store your data, we hold your data, but ultimately, it's up to you to put the right controls and the right things in place to ensure that data is protected, to ensure that it's encrypted, to ensure that it's labeled properly, that access to it is restricted to who it needs to be, that you can't get to it from outside a private VPN connection. And that's why, at least for us, we have so many partnerships, SonicWall, we have a whole bunch of other ones where we've got people building those virtual applications, those virtual appliances that sit on top of our cloud that help give you the security that you need to one, run your businesses securely, but two, not get in the way of productivity and to allow you to be mobile. It's a delicate balancing act when it comes to all three of those, because what's the most secure thing you could do? Put all your servers in a room without any windows, without any doors, and unplug it from the internet. But is that feasible? Right? So you have to think about it from the standpoint of, all right, what is going to be my responsibility as a business for taking this on? And any cloud provider, us included, we will help you understand that, and we'll help you understand what you have the capability to do if you decide to move the data to one of our services.
So let me add one more thing to the topic before y'all talk, because we're the only thing between them and lunch, which is in a few minutes. So add to the discussion, not only about the cloud and how to choose good providers, but the talk earlier about all the different regulations and compliance. So you have all the acronyms from HIPAA and PCI and now GDPR, all these things that are being imposed on a lot of the businesses. Many of the businesses don't even realize that they have to follow some of these regulations. So how should they take that into account when looking at the providers that they use, and what should they be doing to help protect themselves from an assessment perspective? How often should they be doing these types of assessments or requiring their vendors? And what is the give and take in these BAA agreements, or and so forth? I know I added a lot to the subject matter, so.
Yeah. So I think it's a combination of, I think, all of us in this, right? From network and emails perspective, you have to have compliance reports. The biggest thing is reporting, right? Being able to have visibility and being able to generate reports from network and perimeter perspective becomes important from our perspective. I'm sure that guys here have, I don't believe there's any one particular technology that will say, do this and you're compliant, right? It's again, I always believe in the layered approach that will make you compliant, right?
And I think I heard it best in the initial presentation, follow your data. If you don't know what you need to be compliant on or compliant for or compliant with, follow your data. If you have personal financial data, if you have health data, if you have data from overseas individuals, which now becomes a huge thing with GDPR. A lot of people think, it was brought up earlier. I just had someone who came in, they were visiting New Orleans, they came in from England or Germany or whatever it may be, so now I've got some of their data on my system and I'm just a restaurant. Well, like it or not, because you have a European individual's data in your system, you do have to comply with GDPR. So again, I'm gonna steal that line if that's okay, because it makes it very simple. It's follow your data. Now, how do you okay, got it. So, and then it comes down to understanding what you have to do to secure that data, which obviously is not an easy thing to go through and understand. But that's why bringing in third parties sometimes does help that out and does help accelerate that for you. and then looking for the right solutions, whether it's, you know, and in most cases, it's not a single solution. It's a set of solutions. It's layered. It's physical. It's virtual.
And just to add to that, you can talk to your vendor and can very quickly determine if they understand security. Each of these gentlemen have demonstrated vast knowledge of this area. You can ask your vendor, you know, what are you going to do to help me meet my compliance and security requirements? Let them sell their security and compliance to you. You have to have a baseline of understanding, and that's why you're here today, is to get that information. But you know about the core requirements. Here in the United States, a Type 2 SOC 2 audit is a baseline. If you don't know what that is, you need to find out what that is. And your vendor should be doing that here in the United States. If you're international, they should be ISO 27001 certified. If you don't know what that means, you need to understand that. And your vendors absolutely need to know what that means. FISMA, FIPS 142, level 3. Your vendors need to be able to understand that and document for you what they're doing that's applicable for them and for you. So understand the generalities, and then audit the vendors or your potential vendors, and make them prove to you that they are doing everything they can on the compliance and security level, that they understand all of these different regulations that are coming to play, and that they're working to do the due diligence to be prepared for them. And let them prove to you that they are capable of providing you the security and the compliance that you're looking for.
And to add to that, you talk about the cloud and making sure that they comply with everything that we were just talking about. But also, most of the time, companies aren't going to have all their information in the cloud. You're going to have some on site. And that's what HPE really believes is the future of IT. It won't be all in the cloud. It won't be all on site. It's going to be a hybrid. We partner with Microsoft, and we partner.
That's what he said.
Yeah. So we have solutions where we have Microsoft Azure in your office and in the cloud, and because there's pros and cons to each way, but you have to make sure you're compliant on both sides, and make sure your security is up to date on site and in the cloud. So.
Yeah, I'll just kind of echo what everybody else said, but with that additional thought to what Jeremy was saying, and the rest of the panel, Mike too, that it is in both places today. Even though you're getting your services from a cloud provider, how many of y'all have cell phones that are smartphones, and you read your email or you send an instant message? That data is on that particular phone. Is it encrypted when it sits on that portable device? You know, is that provider giving you that encryption at that level? Because what's the easiest thing to lose today? I mean, how many of y'all have kids that have lost at least one cell phone? Right? Imagine how many employees have lost them, and how do you keep that clean? So being able to encrypt the data, because you can't always physically secure it. So.
Before we start to move into wrap, anybody got any particular questions?
I've got another one.
Uh-oh. Go ahead, Coach.
It's related to this, I think, maybe. I don't know. I've been asking my internet providers a couple of times, and there's some talk about it on the net, I guess, of moving our firewall protection up a level. Like we have firewall protection, but we get in a university we get so much junk. That firewall spends most of its time denying stuff. Is there a movement even in the government maybe or whatever to move that protection up to? I know you can get like a DNS protection for DDoS attacks, but is there a movement to move that connection up a level, like to keep stuff from coming from Europe or China or I'm just asking.
See, the challenge that you guys see as university is that you guys have to be open. Right now, if you compare yourself with corporate environment, it's completely different, right? Or even school districts, everything is locked down, right? They have a strong content filtering solution, right? You guys cannot have a content filtering solution in a way because it's a university environment. You have to keep it open, right? But I still think that having the perimeter security at your university with things that are turned on to give you the visibility is still very important. Now, we have to look at what kind of security appliance that you're using. You know, are you using basic stuff like stateful packet inspection, right? Or are you doing deep packet inspection, right? So the difference would be looking at only the headers versus actually looking at the data, because things have changed. Back in the day, only you would look at the header. Now you want to look at the data. You want to be able to, because everything is going, out of your university, everything is going on port 443, encrypted traffic, or port 80. Like majority of the stuff I can say, right? 80+%, 90+% is those two traffic. So being able to differentiate between, you know, port 80, what is in port 80 and what is in port 443 becomes important. So you need the deep packet inspection more than anything else. And giving you the visibility, giving you the easy report saying that, hey, I see student X, username so-and-so, or BYOD. That's another challenge for you guys, is BYOD devices. That's the same challenge for school districts. You know, with corporate environments, it's still more control, right? So you still have to look at, you know, the deep packet inspection piece, because that becomes important, to look at the header, not just the header, but also the data.
Yeah, we look at the, we have Palo Alto, so we're doing a lot of this stuff. I'm just asking if, you know, we're blocking all kind of stuff that's just really, I mean, it's coming from, most of it's coming from China or Russia. It's all crazy stuff. And if that could be moved up a level, it wouldn't, we still wouldn't need ours, but it wouldn't even get to us. It might not even get to the United States.
So what your service providers in that sense can do is they should be able to have services where DDoS and certain things, they should be able to do it for you, right? Because, okay. Some of the other stuff they should be able to do, ideally. Yeah.
Any other questions out there?
You talked about making sure that your cloud provider is stuff that you have an agreement. But what do you do when you're at diversity, somebody like Microsoft or Google? I mean, what does a little company like me have influence on?
So I'll get back to it's still your data, right? And it's still, I mean, to me, I'm not gonna, and when I go to talk to a client, I'm not gonna force them to, I'm gonna say, here's everything that we can provide for you. And then again, it's up to you from a risk posture, from a security standpoint, if you will accept it and we get the ability to host your data or host your service. What I'll say is, at the larger providers, providing services like an Office in Microsoft 365 Azure, like an AWS, like a Google Cloud or G Suite, I mean, you got to think of the scale of the number of customers that are using those cloud services. And to maintain SLAs, to maintain security, there are certain things that those cloud providers just can't budge on. I have an example where I had a former client, this is when I was a consultant, before I came to Microsoft, but I was helping them move to Office 365 for email. They're on Exchange 2010. Exchange 2010, you can go in and you can say, well, I can block base by IP for OWA and ActiveSync. Why can't I do that in Exchange Online? Well, Exchange Online serves millions of customers. If I was able to put that in, I'm allowing it for you, I'm breaking it for the rest of the world. So it's things like that you have to think about inherently in the services of, is it, you know, the service providers are doing it to provide a cost at an economy of scale based on the number of users and how much they can grow it. And there's certain things within that that just can't be negotiated because it would break our terms of service with everyone else that we have.
I think the important.
I'm saying trust but verify. For example, and just going back to on the certifications when it comes to FedRAMP, HIPAA, high-tech, GDPR, any of the things that you have, especially when it comes to Microsoft, we got a whole trust center with all of the documents that are published. Like I said, I just went out and got our FedRAMP documentation on our Office 365 GCC from the GSA JAB that said, this is FedRAMP moderate compliant. I mean, again, trust but verify.
And to that point, ask your provider for those documents. If you have a specific regulatory authority that you have to report compliance with, For example, we will provide business associate agreements if you're in healthcare. We will provide you our, there's some limits to what we can provide because of some of our FISMA contracts with government authorities and things like that. But all of our GDPR training that we've all been sitting through for the past several weeks, because we are a global company as well. So we've all had to sit through it because I have access to records that include GDPR data. We will provide that. Your provider should give you access to those documents, whether it's through a trust center where you can download it and it's kind of a global agreement, or it's a personal agreement that you negotiate, redline, and review with the legal team or your insurance provider, whoever it might be, to work through that. But then do your own verification testing. Back to Jeremy's point, trust but verify. It'd probably be impossible for me to count all of the emails I get from my customers that say, hey, I ran the security scan and they found this vulnerability, CVE from 2016. Well, yeah, it shows up, but we don't use that service, and our security office will reply to that individual penetration test that you did to your own company using the services that some of us have talked about. So trust. Get paper to back that trust up, but then verify by doing your own research, because at the end of the day, if you follow the data is yours, and at the end of the day, you have it, but we will help you secure it.
So whatever you expect on-prem, you should expect the same in the cloud, from a security perspective.
So let's move kind of to a wrap-up, and maybe based on all the things that we've discussed, if anybody has one recommendation as a takeaway, for the audience, what would y'all, kind of as we walk through, what would be, some things you'd say that they should walk out of here with top of their list?
So I'm going to go back to my number one favorite, and it was the thing that I think we opened up with, and it's that password list. How many of you have voicemail? How many of you have changed your voicemail password in the last 90 days? Right. How many of y'all's password is still 1234? Because I help some of y'all set your phone systems up. But at the end of the day, it's make sure that you're working with a provider that has those things, whether it's uncomfortable, whether it's human nature to not want to do that. As a cloud provider, we force you to change your password, within a certain number of days, and we require complexity. Don't call that cloud provider and say, hey, I don't like this. Why can't I use welcome 123 because I've used welcome 123 100 times, or whatever the other common whatever number two was, right? So make sure that it all starts, to Darryl's point, how we kick this off. It starts internally, but then also work with a trusted provider as well, and make sure that you're verifying that trusted provider.
So from my perspective, I would say that, hey, have a layered security approach to everything, right? It's just don't trust only one thing. Have a layered security approach and make sure that you have the visibility, right? You should have visibility into the data. You got to be able to, because if you don't have visibility, you cannot secure it. So have a layered security approach.
I think my last thing that I said is trust but verify. Whenever it comes to any service you're using, internal or external, trust but verify. Do your own pen testing, do your own vulnerability scans, challenge a cloud provider. I mean, I walk in a room, if I were sitting in front of you, I would say, challenge me to have me convince you why we can secure your data, how we can secure your data. If you're not happy, go find someone else. I mean, but that's the challenge that I take on anytime I walk into a room and I'm faced with these questions, saying, I need to make sure you're comfortable, otherwise I've not done my job, or none of these other folks have done their job. So to me, it's all trust but verify.
Speaking for HPE as a hardware company, I think you should just keep everything on site. No.
I heard you say hybrid.
All right. Hybrid's the way to go. Everything that is on site, make sure that you have it encrypted. Make sure that it matches the security in the cloud. Two-factor authentication. Everything. Make sure you just verify everything on site and in the cloud. So.
Should they disconnect it from the internet too?
Yeah. Don't connect to the internet. Just keep it offline. It'll work.
My final word would be that security is truly a journey. And the fact you're sitting here is, commend all of you for finding out where we are now. But tomorrow, things will change. 6 months from now, things will be very different. 2 years from now, the world will be completely different. And so all of us, we vendors who represent and work for you, we need to keep abreast of the changing environment that we all face, because it's a scary place out there. There are threats and evolving threats and other threats we haven't even thought of yet that are coming at us. So we have to be aware of what's coming. You need to have a general knowledge, and then, like Jeremy said, trust, but you got to verify that we know our stuff as vendors and that we're staying abreast and thinking ahead and doing the very best we can to provide you with the security and compliance that you need to meet for your customers and your clients. And so, you're on the journey. Don't stick your head in the sand. Get up and head down that road, and we'll be there with you.
Great. What I would say is that if you're going to have, make sure that it's part of your regular discussion in your company. Raise the discussion of security. Make it a regular part of any status meetings to start planning that journey and adjusting it, because I don't think you ever get to the destination. I think it's a constant journey because it's constantly changing. So, well, I'd like to thank all you guys for coming in from out of town and all the way from Lakeview. But it's beneficial. They're going to be here the rest of the day. So thank you all very much. And